Hey gang, Mean Joe from Balsa USA. This is going to be the first video in our new beginner build series. Keep in mind, there's no purchase necessary to view all these videos, but within the next 30 days, if you decide to order a stick 40 so that you can follow along with the build, every stick 40 sold through Balsa USA is going to receive a free large Balsa USA glue caddy and a bottle of CA for your build. So what we're going to cover in this first video is setup of your building table and also the tools that you're going to need to complete this build. So the most important part of this entire setup process is going to be making sure that you have a perfectly level build surface. That's going to be critical. Any imperfections you have in your build surface are going to transfer directly to the airplane that you're trying to build. And that goes from any build you'll ever do. From the basic stick 40 clear up to the third scale DR1, you have to make sure that you're building on a perfectly level building surface. You can build it at a little bit of an angle if that's what you prefer, as long as the surface is completely level. I'm going to show you how I set up mine, and we'll get started. Okay, so like we already talked about, the most important part of your setup is going to be making sure that you have a perfectly flat building surface. Okay, this part is, again, going to be critical. Any imperfections you have on your building surface are going to transfer directly into any build that you do. This goes from the beginning level stick 40 clear up to the third scale DR1. You have to make sure you're building on a perfectly level surface. I don't want to kick that horse too much. I think he's already dead. Just make sure that your building surface is perfectly level. Now let me walk you through how I got mine set up. So what I did is I went out and I bought a hollow core door. You can buy a solid core door, hollow core door, it works fine, okay? So the reason I went with a door is because I'd like to be able, my big bench, I have an 4x8 workbench here that I want to be able to build on, but it sets up against the wall. So I went with a door this time, so I'll be able to rotate it around and get to the other side easily and not have to worry about not being able to reach anything on the other side that I'm working on. So that being said, I went with a door on this table. So I went out and bought a hollow core door. You can get these at any of your local home improvement shops. You can buy them at the hardware stores, any place that carries doors. Now, when you're selecting your door, whether you're going with a hollow core door or you're going with a solid core door, you have to make sure that that door is perfectly straight. I'll be perfectly honest, when I went to go shop for mine, I went through probably 5 or 6 doors before I found one that was acceptably straight. You want it to be just as straight as you can get. All you need to do is put it up on its edge, sight the line down it, and check it to see if it's level. If you want to get hardcore with it, grab a builder's square or a long metal ruler and check it to see if it's level, okay? All I did was sight it. You can pretty much tell if it's straight and good to go. So I added that to my cart. Now, next thing I did is I went down and bought a 6-foot 1x2. Nothing fancy. You don't have to buy the expensive lumber. This was just the cheapest 6-foot 1x2 material that they had, and that's what I went with, okay? So what you do, especially if you're going to build with a hollow core door, okay, it's very important that you brace it, okay? As you can see here, I braced it all the way down both sides, okay? That's going to be important for you to do. That'll help your building board last a lot longer. It won't warp as easily, and it's going to give it some rigidity for future builds. When you start moving it around and stuff, it's going to hold up a lot longer, okay? So all I did was cut the 1x2 to size, and I'll tell you a little trick. I started from one end. I believe I cut these as 24 inches long, and those fit on each end of the board. Then what I did was I did both ends. So I did this end first, then I did this end second, okay? To get this measurement from here to here, so I had it right on both sides, I cut all 4 of my 24-inch pieces and then just used the scrap leftover I had to make this gap here. I just laid the other piece of scrap down and on both ends and stuck the other one right up to it, and that gave it the same gap on both ends. It turns out it's almost perfectly in the middle, so it worked out good. So that's just a quick tip that I did to help you get it lined up correctly. So all I did then was I cut these off and use just regular Titebond wood glue, nothing fancy. I believe it's Titebond 2, okay? Spread the glue out nice and evenly. Stuck it down to the end and clamped it and let it dry. Did the same thing on the other end. Clamped it down, let it dry. I don't have an overabundance of clamps yet. I know that's one of the things that as a potential woodworker, you can never have enough clamps. Right now I don't have enough clamps, and I was very apparent on this build. So what I did is I clamped down one end, glued it, let it dry for about 45 minutes, came back down, did the same thing to the other end, let that dry about 45 minutes. Then I came into the centers. Now, quick tip. When you're doing the centers, since I only have clamps that I could really get on the ends, what I did is I have these sandbags. I have different kinds of sandbags, and all I did was go and buy some play sand from the home improvement store, and I put them in. I've got 1 gallon bags, and I've got these little sandwich bags for different sizes of weights with sand in them. So I used that in the center on all the boards. So I laid this on the center on all the boards, and here's a quick picture so that you can see what I did, okay? I let this dry for 24 hours before I did anything else. I built that part of it and I left it. Didn't try to do anything else. There's no rush with this process. You want to make sure that glue is nice and dry. Next step I did is not critical. It's something that's an option if you have the abilities to be able to do that. I did it just as an extra added measure. Once I had the boards glued down to my door, I went ahead and went through and countersunk some screws and put 4 wood screws in each board just to make sure it lasts me a lot longer. You're going to want to countersink those so you don't have them on the bottom wobbling around, okay? Get them countersunk and get them on there, and your build surface will then be perfectly flat, okay? And that's what you're looking for, perfectly flat, okay? The next piece what I have on top, I went this time with a piece of drywall. You can use drywall, you can use Zona Saw, you can use beaver board, ceiling tiles work good. Whatever is your preference and whatever you have readily available to you. I would prefer actually doing one in a beaver board, but here in Michigan where I'm located, I was not able to find beaver board at my local shop. So I just went with a piece of drywall. Now, the thing I'll tell you with drywall is this. It'll work great. It's going to get lots of little pinholes in it. After a few builds, after a while, you're going to either have to replace the drywall or try to fill it in. For me, $12 for another piece of drywall. I'll just buy another piece of drywall and redo it, okay? So just be aware that if you're going with drywall, at some point you're going to have to replace this top. For now, it's going to work great. What I did with the drywall was I cut it to the size of my door, and as an extra added measure, I had some really nice duct tape, some black duct tape. Once I had it set, I went around the edges with the black duct tape. What that does is that keeps it from flaking off. If you've never done anything with drywall, it's really chalky and powdery. With the duct tape on there, I won't get that stuff all over my shop, and I think my board will end up lasting longer because it'll get less damage to the edges when I'm moving stuff around. Again, optional step, you can do that if you want. Now, what I did for this one is, instead of using like double-sided tape or any kind of adhesion to the door, I just went ahead and put a couple of small little sprays of some 3M contact adhesive on there. Sprayed a couple of spots. That'll keep the board from sliding around on top of my door so that it doesn't move while I'm trying to build. If I get ready to swap this out, all I have to do is take a little spatula or trowel and just pry it up a little bit and it'll pop right off of here, okay? It's only just a couple of little small spots, just enough to give it enough tack so that it doesn't slide around on here. That's pretty much it for your building board. That's all you really need. Hollow core door, piece of drywall, and some 1x2s. Some wood glue, and you're all set. So you don't need a lot of fancy tools. One of the things that's important to do once you have it built, you're going to want to get a long straight edge, preferably a thick metal straight edge. Drywall square, any of that kind of stuff, long, perfectly straight edge, and you're going to lay it down on top of your bench and look for gaps under it between your building board and the ruler or whatever you decide to use. Just make sure whatever you're using to check that with is perfectly level. I happen to have a long metal contractor's ruler that works perfect for this. I believe it's a 5 foot long, and it's perfect to set on here and check. Not really expensive. Again, you can get them from home improvement stores. Watch for the sales. I know one particular store does the 11% off sale all the time. So check them out and get the tools that you need. Again, you don't need a lot of stuff to do this. Okay, so now let's go over some of the tools that you're going to need for your build. What I'll do is I'll go over the tools that are absolutely necessary, and then I will go over some optional tools that if you have the means, you might want to pick up just to make the process a little bit easier on yourself. So, the number one thing that you're going to use during any model build that you're going to use more than you're going to use any other piece of equipment is sandpaper. So what I have here is a couple of options. I've taken some sandpaper of different grits and got a hold of one of our bag of blocks that we have at Balsa USA and just used 3M adhesive to glue down 2 different grits of sandpaper. I think one of these is 220 and one's 180. If I'm not mistaken on this one, I didn't mark this one, so I'm not 100% sure, but it's close to that. Okay, so very cheap, very inexpensive. You can get the bag of blocks. You can go buy some sandpaper and just 3M glue it right down to there, and you're good to go. It works great. It's cheap. Get all kinds of them. This is a 3M sanding block. This is a 320 fine block. I just happen to have one on hand that I use. It's kind of spongy, so it kind of helps work around corners and stuff a little bit. Gives you a good edge. One of the things that's optional would be this 3M fine 45-degree block. So this one comes in really handy. If you have any 45-degree angles that you need to sand, this is perfect for doing that. You'd lay your stock right along the top edge and sand down to the 45-degree angle, and that's going to give you your 45-degree angle. It actually is also sandpaper, but I don't use it for that. I use this just as my 45-degree block that I use anytime I need a 45-degree angle. Okay? One of the next things you're going to need is you're going to need a hobby knife. Okay? Doesn't matter what the brand name is. As long as you got plenty of blades, that's all that's really important. Now, it's recommended that you use a number 11 hobby blade, and what I would do is I would just buy a lot of these. They're not very expensive. You can see here, this is a box of 100 blades for $12.50. You're going to go through them relatively quickly, and you always want to have more on hand. Last thing you want to do is be rolling with your build and have to run out and buy more blades. So I just go ahead and buy a few of them and have them on hand. That way you've always got some. Okay. Next thing you're going to need some of these T-pins. So there's different types of T-pins. What you have to pay attention to, there's also not just different types, but there's also different sizes. So these are the smaller T-pins. They also make a larger T-pin that has a larger diameter here. Anytime I'm pinning down balsa to do a project, I try to use the thin T-pins as often as I can, for the most part, just because they make a smaller hole. Okay. They also have these pins that you can get with the ends on them. These are nice. I use these primarily for pinning down my plans to my board, and I also use them in corners where I have to make sure that I pin down 2 pieces at once. I can stick this in there, and the red end makes it a little bit easier to hold that stuff down. Okay. One of the next things you're going to need is some type of saw. Now, I happen to have a couple of options here. I have what we call a Zona Saw. These are available on balsausa.com, and they have a set that has 4 different blades with it. That's what I would recommend. They do sell the single blades also as well. This is great to have, and you'll use it a lot. Now, if you don't have the Zona Saw readily available to you, and you don't want to order one, another option is to go with a flat saw like this Fat Max. Okay, what I will tell you about using a saw like this, because this saw here is a lot thicker of an edge than a Zona Saw. This is why I would recommend the Zona Saw, because it's got a razor. It's called a razor saw. It's got a razor sharp edge. Okay, so it's very thin. You can use a saw like this if you already have one or want to go out and grab one. The trick to using one of these would be any place you make a mark that you want to cut, I would cut outside that mark and then use a sanding block to get to the line. Because this being thicker, you want to always cut a little bit longer than what you actually need. So make your mark on your board, cut short of the line, or I should say cut on the outside of the line, and then sand to your final dimension. This balsa wood that we use is going to move around on you a little bit. It's going to shrink, it's going to expand, and you always want to make sure you give yourself a little wiggle room. So when you're doing your cuts, and we'll talk about this later when we start the build, cut to the outside of the line and sand up to the line. You'll get much better results and you'll waste a lot less balsa that way. One of the next things you're going to want to make sure you have on hand is a decent drill and some bits. You can have cordless, it doesn't matter. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just a drill and some drill bits. You're going to want to have some masking tape. I like to use this green frog tape. It works really well. It's low tack, so it doesn't stick to anything that I don't want it to stick to. And when I take it off there, it doesn't leave any residue. So I use that. That's my masking tape. You're going to want to get yourself some wax paper. This is what you're going to want to put down over your plans. And when I get ready to set up the build, I'll show you how that works. You put your plans down, and then you put wax paper on top of it. What that does is that keeps the CA from sticking to your plans and ruining your plans, okay? You're going to want to make sure for sure you have some wax paper down. We already talked about the straight building board. Scissors. Now, a couple of options for scissors available. There's lots of different types of scissors. So I've got everything from the super cheap, like dollar store type scissors, okay, all the way up to the ones that I really, really like to use. And these are actually a pair of trauma centers scissors. These are fantastic for working with balsa wood. They're going to hold their edge a lot longer than most traditional scissors, and they'll cut through just about anything. So if you have a medical store, or if you know somebody that's in that profession, try to see if they can hook you up with a set of trauma scissors. These are great for what we're doing with these builds. Again, not something that's mandatory, just kind of an optional thing. I really like these scissors, and they'll last me a long time. Okay, so that's pretty much it for all the stuff that you absolutely have to have. You can build the Stick 40 Plus with the tools that I've already covered. No problem at all. You don't need a lot of stuff. So what I want to do now is I want to go through and show you a couple of optional tools that I have. So if you have the means or if you have them on hand, they're a great addition to your building and they will help you build a little bit quicker. If you want to start slow and get a couple of things at a time, I would suggest doing that. Just keep in mind, one of the things I've learned over the years with hobby is the nicer the tool, the longer they last. I know some of this stuff can be fairly expensive, but you get what you pay for. Now, that being said, screwdrivers. Screwdrivers are very important. Now, you can get away with a cheap set of screwdrivers. What I would suggest is at some point in your career, some point in your building, that you go out and you get yourself a nice set of screwdrivers. This is the most replaced tool I probably have, is screwdrivers. These happen to be Vessels. I absolutely love them. They work great, and I haven't had to replace any of these since I've had them, and I use them all the time. So Vessels, or basically any nice screwdriver, there's all kinds of different brand names out there. Find one that you like, find one that you think will last you a long time, and go out and grab them. I've went through several different screwdrivers over the years, and I've settled on these, and they work great for me. One of the next thing I'm going to talk about is pliers. I keep several different kinds of pliers on hand. I have all different shapes and sizes. I have needle nose, I have ball nose, I have channel locks, I have vice grip pliers. Pliers are something that I use a lot in what we do here, and it's something that you want to try to make sure you have a large variety of. These are really inexpensive. I can't remember exactly where I got these from, but I know I didn't spend a lot of money on them. You can get just one set to start with, but as you build, you're going to find different uses for different sizes of pliers, so that's something that'll probably grow with you as you grow in building. Next thing I'll talk to you about that's optional are these Great Plains sanding bars. These are actually really nice to have a few on hand. They make quick use of any straight sanding that you need to do. You can lay the edge right down on the table and slide it right along your build to get a straight edge along the corner. You just glue the type of sandpaper that you want to use on it. This one happens to be set up for 150. I have another one here that's set up for 220, another one that's set up here for 80 grit. Just really nice to have those on hand. I use them a lot, and they're fairly inexpensive. One of the other optional tools that I'll talk about are these little round cutters. These little cutting wheels you can get at most hobby shops. They are really nice to have. They make some really good cuts, and they're a lot easier to work with sometimes than a regular hobby knife because you have some grip that you can use. You can have some force. So when cutting the balsa and stuff like we're cutting, it actually works really well to have one of these little round cutters. They work great. They look kind of like a pizza cutter, but I use this thing all the time. Really comes in handy. Again, this second set of tools I'm showing you are just options. You don't need any of this stuff to get started. Something else I'll show you is a nice combination square. What you're probably going to want to do is you're going to want to have these in a couple of different sizes as well as you get going. Great for finding edges. Great for making sure you're level. Awesome for that. You're going to want a nice couple of rulers for your measurements. One of the things that's going to be important to have at some point are some 1, 2, 3 blocks. These work great, and you'll see me use them in the build for lining up your parts to hold them perfectly 90 degrees. Okay, that's what these are for. You can buy them online. You can buy them in hardware stores. They're literally called 1, 2, 3 blocks because of the measurements. Okay, 1 inch by 2 inch by 3 inches. That's why they're called that. I would suggest using the solid core ones. If you're gonna buy a set to start with, I'd go with the solid ones, not the ones with the holes drilled all in them, because these make great weights while you're building too. The ones that are drilled out in the center are a little bit lighter, and a lot of times you need a little bit more weight, and these are perfect for that. Okay? Well, gang, that about wraps up the setup and the tools you're going to need for your first balsa build. Keep in mind, you don't need a lot of extra tools, you don't need a lot of extra equipment, and you don't even need a lot of space. If all you have room for is to set your build up on a card table, so be it. It'll work just fine. You don't need a lot of stuff. All you have to do, again, is make sure that your build surface is completely level and flat, and you'll be good to go. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and check the bell on the subscription bar. What this does is make sure that you get notifications when the new content for this series comes out. Thanks for watching. Happy building.